just make sure it's actually recording. I have made the mistake of it not recording.
I've done that as well myself.
In the first few minutes, and I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Go on.
Can we start again? The day today is Friday, the 27th of October 2023. My name is Karima Ali, and I'm here today with Jenny Douglas. And so my first question, Jenny, is yes, how did you get into the work that you're doing today? What would you kind of say are the beginning of that work?
I think perhaps the beginnings were there from a very early age, but they actually, I guess, properly materialised when I started to work for Training in Health and Race, which was 1982. And Training in Health and Race was set up as a health education council and National Extension Council project, which was to look at the
training
needs of health workers in relation to racial minorities, as they were called then. And so the work involved firstly finding out from black and minority ethnic communities what the health needs were, and then developing training materials and then delivering training. And I think that I'd thought about kind of inequities and inequalities in health before that, but at least this gave me an opportunity to actually work in the area. I was a research and development officer for Birmingham and the West Midlands, and there were 5 of us covering different areas in the UK, and our main offices were based in Bethnal Green.
Oh wow, okay. Did you grow up in Birmingham?
I grew up in Wolverhampton, so
So
just north of Birmingham.
just north of Birmingham. Okay, amazing. Okay, so the work in the that you were doing in that state, how did it kind of develop into the work that you the research that you kind of narrowed down later on?
I think that all the elements of the work that I do now were present in Training in Health and Race, because we became very aware of inappropriate services in terms of the National Health Service, particularly around maternity services. So Jo Larby produced a report. She was one of the research and development officers, and we all worked together, and somebody would take the lead on a particular area. So Jo produced this report on maternity services, and that was way back in 1983 that report was published. So we've known since before then that black and minoritized women were not getting appropriate maternity services. And so the work that I'm doing now, which is around black women and maternal mortality, has had its roots, in the 1980s, and that's why I get, I think, frustrated by the slow pace of change, and that during this slow response from authorities and organisations, black women are dying.
Absolutely. Can you tell me a bit more about the kind of the community work involvement around community work around mental health that you've been doing?
Sense again.
Can you tell me a bit more about your involvement around community work in mental health around this time?
Okay. So first of all, I'll say that the way that I see health is that I see mental health as part of the overall kind of approach to health. And so in the 80s, when I was working with Training in Health and Race, I lived in Birmingham, and I was doing a lot of community work, voluntary work. In fact, since before working with Training in Health and Race, from the end of the 70s, I was working with the Harambee organisation. I was on the management committee, and I was also working with black women's organisations. So there was a black women's, I can't remember what we were called actually, black feminist women. There was a group in Birmingham that I belonged to, and then there was an organisation called Rafiki House, which was the Handsworth Young Mothers Project. And so I was working with young mothers then in terms of raising awareness about health issues. And one of the health issues that became very apparent was the use of Depo-Provera, the contraceptive injection, the injection for contraception. And so what was happening is that black women and also working class women were being given the contraception without their knowledge or consent. And I remember going into like a health group at Rafiki House and talking about this, and women saying, actually, I've been given it. Because what would happen is that straight after childbirth, somebody would go into the women and say, we're going to give you 2 injections. We're going to give you rubella and DP. So they never fully explained what they were. And their argument was that when you get the rubella injection, you're not supposed to get pregnant for 6 months, and therefore that is why they gave Depo-Provera. But they never explained that to women. And one of the women in our group actually worked for family planning services. And so when she gave birth, they said this to her, and she said, I'll have the rubella, I won't have the DP, because she knew what DP was. And they said, oh, well, you have to have DP because you can't get... She said, I know that, and I won't get pregnant. So she was just a really clear example to me that these kind of racist practices were taking place, because there was a real concern about black and minoritized women having too many babies. They just saw us as being too sort of fecund. And then other women in the group actually started to say that they think that they had Depo-Provera without their consent because they had a lot of the side effects of Depo-Provera. So that was probably the first time that I became aware of the political implications, not just the inequalities, but how, things like Depo-Provera were being used against black women.
What type of work you were doing in this group to kind of raise awareness about these things?
We were running health groups and health days. So we did sessions on all aspects of health, including kind of nutrition. And it's funny really looking back, because there were so many bits of the work that I do that kind of intersected. So after I finished working for Training in Health and Race, I actually went to work for West Birmingham Health Authority, which covered Handsworth and Aston. And so the aim there was to improve health, and we're trying to use the Health for All principles. And I wanted to make sure that all our health promotion programmes actually met the needs of black women. And we also had a group of many black women who worked in the NHS as family planning advisors. And so we would have things like health days where we would actually not just give advice, but actually there were clinics so people can go and get family planning advice, or they could get advice on any other area, so that the services were geared towards their needs. And as I say, as part of that, we realised that we had to take kind of political action. And so I was working around things like mental health, things like sickle cell anemia. I remember actually that Elizabeth Anyonwu, who's done a lot of work on raising awareness and getting change in terms of services for sickle cell anemia, came to one of the local meetings in Birmingham. And, 'cause we were trying to get health services to change. And I mean, health services were really racist then. I mean, I'm not saying they're not racist now, but they were overtly racist. So I remember in my role as District Health Promotion Manager going to a meeting and asking for appropriate screening for sickle cell so that mothers and their partners were screened. And in this meeting, a hospital consultant in this area actually got up and said, well, what's the point of doing that? These mothers don't know who the fathers of their children are.
Oh my God.
I mean, and people would come out with racist comments like that, which were totally unfounded and totally untrue.
Of course. Yeah.
And you have to, you're trying to challenge, this kind of racist information.
Yeah. And it becomes, it's a wall almost. It becomes, you understand at some point that this is systemic throughout.
Yeah.
And can I touch a bit more on when it first became a political thing for you? Can you talk a bit more about that?
I think that because I was working, I've been working with this project Training Health and Race, when we were working with local community groups to find out what health needs were. I was becoming more and more aware of the political nature of health services, and also I had been, because I always read a lot, and so I've been reading a lot of Angela Davis's work, and she kind of conceptualized it for me in terms of it being, that racism was, and racism within health services was political.
Yeah.
And so I think that I always had, well, not always had, but I developed that conceptualization, when it came to working with groups and hearing about individuals' experiences about their treatment within the NHS, made me aware that it was a very political, issue, and that, as you say, racism was systemic. It just ran through the health services. And the way in which health workers, be they nurses or midwives or consultants in different areas, medical consultants, that the training that they received had racism throughout it.
Yeah.
And they had particular perceptions and stereotypes about black and minoritised women.
Right. I'm also finding that actually a lot of, you're completely right about mental health. All aspects of health, particularly when it comes to black women, cannot necessarily be separated because the systemic racism kind of runs through all the ways that we are service users in all these areas. And I'm finding a lot in the archives that things like the service user movement are able to have a separate movement for mental health because it served the wider community, as opposed to black women's community groups who couldn't just focus on one issue because it affected every part of their lives, including their children and their community and their partners. And did you find that in a lot of the community groups that you were working with?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think in relation to mental health services, service providers were focused on mental health and black men, and it was like this big bad black man and so they were focused on when I say addressing schizophrenia, it was like misaddressing schizophrenia, because so many black men were misdiagnosed in relation to schizophrenia. And I think that the focus of mental health services was on that. And so black women were kind of ignored in relation to mental health services earlier on. And as you said, for black women, mental health was just part of the whole kind of complex of health. Because not only were black women receiving poor services, but so were their children, so were their partners, so were their kind of families, their mothers, aunts, everybody. And so, in a way, black women were more focused on sort of day-to-day living and trying to make sure that whoever was in their family was surviving in lots of ways. And that, in and of itself, had its impact on the mental health of black women. I mean, I think there was then, and I hope it's improving, but a stigma about mental health issues, and a lot of black women, felt, well, there were several